Moving across the floor, I'd like to now welcome Ellie Breeze. Ellie is a second-year undergraduate student reading HSPS at Peterhouse and the Michaelmas Equalities Officer for the Union. She won the right to speak for open audition. Ellie, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you, Madam President. Just to sort of echo what Lara was saying earlier, I cannot explain, one, how nervous and terrified, but mainly how happy and so glad and grateful to see so many people here tonight to have this conversation, and not just women in the chamber as well, seeing a range of individuals, men and women. It really demonstrates that there is an appetite for this conversation, not just within the society, but within the university more broadly. And I could not be more proud to say that we are having this conversation in this chamber, and thank you all genuinely for attending. Unless you disagree with me, then you can leave if you don't mind. But I just want to start with sort of almost a couple of disclaimers, so to say. When I first told my friends that I was going to be speaking in opposition to this motion, they said to me, please, God, don't tell me you're going to make some conservative argument about purity and how women need to be pure to have a valid argument, anything like that. And I was like, girl, no, don't you worry about that. This argument is not meant, first and foremost, to demean individuals that engage in sex work. It is not to say that I do not respect individuals that participate in sex work. I do believe people can rationally and willingly choose to engage in sex work, and this also is not just an issue faced by women. I want to also highlight men can engage in sex work. Men can be sex workers themselves. So I need you all to pull me up, actually. If I ever say specifically women or female-specific pronouns, please do call me up. I'm trying to be gender neutral in this debate. But the point here that I'm trying to make, and the reason why I'm stood on this side, is because I genuinely believe that any engagement with an oppressive system, more specifically with the tools of that oppression, not aimed at destroying those tools of oppression, not aimed specifically at the liberation of individuals from that system, cannot, under any circumstances, be compatible with a liberation movement such as feminism. To illustrate this argument, I'll talk briefly about capitalism and Marxism, and to use that as an example of a liberation movement, but also to highlight the fact that I don't think it's hypocritical for individuals who claim to be feminists to engage in sex work. That's an important distinction that I want to make here. I do believe you can be feminist and engage in something that contributes to the oppression of women that supposedly stands in dichotomy to the movement that you claim to represent. Indeed, the notion that fucking has become freedom, and I credit Alex for this quote that she told me about 2 hours ago, that is entirely misconstrued and indeed has falsely defined liberation in the male interest. This is a claim that I will elaborate on later. But first, I want to critically assess the claim that sex work exists as a form of liberation by introducing a conversation about the public and the private and a distinction between that. Going back in history, unfortunately not that long ago actually, women existed as a form of private property. We were owned by our husbands, we were owned by our fathers. We could not hold property, we could not hold money, we could not hold land. We were owned, we were there to be sold and bought. We were there to be traded. Feminist movements from around sort of the 50s, 60s onwards sought to abolish that link. They sought to directly establish women as individuals in their own rights, not in relation to their male counterparts or male relatives. But along the way, and I fear the patriarchy may have had something to do with this, women have shifted from private property to public property. And more specifically, women's sex lives have become public property in the public domain. And that's what I want to critique, and that is my issue with sex work. Women's right to privacy has seemingly been revoked. Our sex lives are now in the public sphere. They are free game, so to say, to speculate on, to comment on, and to judge. Now, sex entering the public sphere isn't necessarily bad. That is something that I want to specify. Rather, it's the property aspect of that, and the fact that men, overwhelmingly men, feel justified and legitimized when it comes to commenting on women's sex lives and what they choose to do behind closed doors. The The issue with sex, and more specifically sex work existing in the public sphere, is in a sense it legitimizes this old narrative of women as sexual beings. It implies that women want sex inherently. As the quote that I said earlier, fucking being freedom, really illustrates this. Because I think something that we forget is that the feminist movement is not entirely homogenous. It's incredibly diverse. And women within that movement, and indeed men within that movement, don't necessarily want to have sex. They don't necessarily want to engage in sexual behaviour. You have the ace community, you have the aromantic community more broadly within the LGBTQ+. But by equating liberation with sex, by equating liberation more specifically with sex work, it feels as though we're disregarding that aspect of the feminist movement. It feels like we're disregarding that aspect of the population, disregarding what they want and conversations that they could have and they could offer. So the first claim that I wanted to challenge here tonight was this supposed supremacy of sexual liberation and how it's been co-opted to assume women's sexuality and assume women want to engage in sex. As I stated earlier, sex work is not inherently feminist, but as I said, feminists can engage in it. The second thing that I wanted to highlight was more broadly the tools of the patriarchy. And I wanted to elaborate on my claim earlier, claiming that the feminist movement had, in a sense, been co-opted by male interests and liberation had been redefined in the male interest, more specifically regarding sex. This idea of liberation, specifically talking about the second wave of feminism when it comes to the 1960s and the 1970s, and this idea of sexual liberation, predominantly characterized in the form of sex work, has created this image of this sexually free, and I'm saying that in quotation marks if anyone can't see at the top, free woman who sleeps around, she's free, she's good fun, she likes to party, she goes out every night, comes back with another guy every other night. And that behaviour and that lifestyle is obviously completely fine for an individual to engage in. But what I challenge is the characterisation and the assumption that every single woman under the patriarchy, every single woman engaged in the feminist movement believes that and acts like that. Some women want to wait for marriage. Some women don't want to wait at all. And both options are completely valid. But the equation of liberation to sex challenges and blurs that divide and erases an entirely valid community within the feminist movement.
Point of information.
Yes.
So you're conflating sex work is a necessary part of liberation as opposed to something within the subset of liberation.
Could you say that one more time? I'm really sorry.
So you're sort of saying that individual women or indeed men have their own choices within the movement, and I completely agree. But does that not put you on that side of the bench? Because that means it can be compatible. The motion isn't suggesting that it's a necessary part of feminism or indeed liberation.
Yes, no, and I would completely agree with you there. I think what I was trying to do in this speech is highlight the importance of choice, but the issue that I take when it comes to equating sex work as a form of feminism is that, as I'm going to go on to sort of highlight properly later, sex work engages with the tools of the patriarchy and, in a sense, it legitimizes those tools of the patriarchy. It legitimizes a certain viewing of women under the patriarchy. And so what I'm claiming is that while sex work indeed is a valid choice for individuals to engage in, it is not necessarily something that contributes to getting rid of the patriarchy, in a sense, and that is the issue that I take when we're trying to make the claim that it's feminist. So I hope that answers your question. Nice. Moving on, as I was going to regarding the tools of oppression within the patriarchy, and something that I wanted to speak quite candidly about, actually, in this chamber, was that the patriarchy, and when we have conversations surrounding the patriarchy, we tend to treat it as this far-off theoretical conversation. And indeed, I think this is something, when it comes to conversations in Cambridge more generally, we tend to forget that these are real issues, and this is a real conversation that impacts people's lives. When it comes to experiences as a woman, and more specifically experiences as a female student at this university, I know, sadly, that next to every single woman in this chamber will relate to the experiences that I'm about to relay. And that is a heartbreaking fact that it's something I struggle to reconcile every single day when it comes to living this reality under the patriarchy. Texting your friends before you go out, before you go for a walk, texting your friends when you're at the club, your friends running up to check on you when you go off with someone to make sure that they haven't somehow kidnapped you, checking for drink spikes. You can never leave your drink alone, leave it unattended. You can't be left unalone, you can't be left unattended. It's those experiences that I wanted to try and communicate here tonight to highlight that whilst, yes, this is a theoretical conversation that we're having in the safety of this chamber, the fact is safety is not a guarantee for individuals, and more specifically women, under the patriarchy, and that's why I feel so strongly about this debate. To try and conclude briefly, sex work engages with the tools of the patriarchy and in tools of oppression. It presents women as objects. It presents women as things to be used and things to be thrown away and discarded when no longer wanted. It places women, more specifically women's sex lives, firmly into the public sphere, but not as a form of liberation, as a form of property, of public intellectual property for speculation, for laughs, for jokes. Sex work is not feminist. That does not mean to say it is not valid, and individuals who engage with it are not valid, but any action undertaken under this system of patriarchy, not specifically aimed at the liberation of individuals from that system, cannot be misconstrued as a form of liberation. And indeed, if we want to see progress, if we want to see change, we need to recognise that reality. And we need to take action, start dismantling this system, so that women, and indeed all individuals under it, can walk around and feel safe. Thank you.